Oliver from Rugby League in My Opinion here. It is time for a Rugby League in My Opinion on the finals interview, and I'm here with my former podcast partner and someone who I haven't collaborated with in a little while now, Clarkey from Clarkey's Rugby League column. How are you today, man?
Very good, man. Thank you for having me back on. And like you say, it has been a while. Some might say too long since we've done something together. So we'll have to work on some stuff on the off season, I think.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I've had people who have messaged me asking what happened to the podcast. So I guess it's just good to see that there was, some support for it and people were keen on us collaborating. So we're back here today and I'm sure we'll do some stuff together in the future. But for now, are you ready to get into some finals topics?
Can't wait. It's been a great final series, plenty of points scored. And let's get into it. I'm ready.
Yeah, well, the first thing on my end, I've had a lot of people commenting on posts on my page, and at the moment, I haven't really checked the odds, but from what I gather from people, the Bunnies are being backed pretty heavily here to actually beat the Panthers in an upset. Just quickly want to get your thoughts. What chances do you give the Rabbitohs of actually taking down the Panthers this weekend?
Yeah, personally, I have to lean with the Panthers, and that's just because we saw them face a bit of adversity in the Roosters game, and then they came together as a team and rebounded. And I suppose that was one of my big questions headed into the finals, because in the games against the Eels and the Knights where it didn't go so well, we didn't see them rebound in a classic team fashion. But they answered that question against the Roosters. So therefore, with the week off, I'd have to lean towards the Panthers. But I will say, if there's any team left in the competition, or there was any team this year that was going to beat the Panthers in finals, realistically, I think it could have only been the South Sydney Rabbitohs. And that's because not only do they have the form halves pairing of the competition right now, but they're going to fight fire with fire against the Panthers. Two absolutely superb attacking teams. Personally, I think it'll come down to who can defend a little bit better, and that's why I'm leaning with the Panthers slightly.
Yeah, well, that's what it comes down to, defense, because we know how great these two teams are in attack. We know they can put the points on. It's going to be a question of who can actually prevent the other team from scoring. I don't know, for me, I'm pretty heavily going towards the Panthers as well. I was surprised at how much support the Bunnies are getting. They are the form team of the competition, but we got to remember the Penrith Panthers have not lost a game in 16 odd weeks. So you want to talk about form and momentum. Penrith have just had it consistently throughout the year. It's more a question of that sustained form. Does that get you over the line, or is it the hot team at the time? As I said, still pretty much leaning towards the Panthers. But another question for you, similar. Who do you give more a chance to? Who do you give a better chance to, the Rabbitohs or the Raiders?
I'd probably say the Raiders, and that's because we've seen them defeat Melbourne a fair few times over the past. Well, I mean, it happened last final series, I believe. Yeah. It's certainly happened in Melbourne before. There's a bit more evidence there to suggest that Melbourne are susceptible to a loss as opposed to the Panthers. And like you just said, people are really focusing on how great the Rabbitohs are at the moment, but they're forgetting how great the Panthers have been for 16 weeks in a row, 4 months without a loss. It's almost unheard of in the modern game. The last example I can think close to that would have been the Cronulla Sharks back in 2016, I believe it was, and then they went on to actually win the whole thing. So I have to say I give more of a chance to the Raiders because we've seen them defeat the Storm before. They play a style of footy that sort of disrupts them. And with both of these games, the interesting thing is I think I'm going to tip the Storm and the Panthers. But I think if there's any team to beat both of them, it is the Rabbitohs and the Raiders respectively. And that's why these preliminary finals are so exciting.
Yeah, I have to give the Raiders the edge as well over the Rabbitohs. I'm still tipping Melbourne. I don't know. I feel like the Raiders, I give them about a 40% chance, whereas I give South maybe a 30% chance against Penrith. I don't know. They both could do it. I wouldn't be surprised if both of those teams got over the line, but it's sort of we're forgetting their opposition, right? We're forgetting that they're up against Penrith and the Storm, and a lot of people have also tipped the Raiders. It's been pretty close, I guess. People tipping a Panthers Storm grand final on my page, at least. 2 people tipping a Rabbitohs Raiders grand final, which I'm very surprised about. Part of me thinks that might be a little bit of that wishful thinking that us rugby league fans like to have. You know, fans would probably prefer to see 5th go up against 6th in the grand final and have an underdog win it. Personally, I think if an underdog's going to win the comp, they want to do it against a Panthers or a Storm. But yeah, I have to agree. I think it'll be a Panthers Storm grand final. We'll go to a team who's just been knocked out of the finals now. Now, I know at least at the start of the year, you had the Parramatta Eels tipped to win the premiership. 2 questions. First of all, for you, what was the big thing that went wrong towards the end of this year? And second of all, do Parramatta progress, stay the same, or regress in 2021?
Well, I think what went wrong, it starts with the Dylan Brown injury. When he went down, they lost a ton of momentum. But even before that, it was evident that this isn't the same Eels team we had in the rounds 1 to 10. They looked tired, they looked flat, and both of those observations were based around attack because we saw how great they were defensively against the Panthers. But the fact is, if you defend your line that many sets, you're simply not going to have enough left in attack. That's what we saw there. So I sort of go back to that COVID break, and I think obviously that they started the year pretty well, and then you have to imagine that their coaching staff really took it to them during the COVID period. We know Brad Arthur's a bit of a no-nonsense coach. He's got a bit of that old school attitude, like a Michael Maguire. So I'm thinking teams like Michael Maguire's Tigers and Brad Arthur's Parramatta Eels, I think they were flogged way too hard in the COVID break. Whereas we had Wayne Bennett actually come out and confirm, as far as the Rabbitohs are concerned, he didn't flog his players in that period, and that's why they are firing now when it matters. So although this season was a bit of a rarity and an outlying season, and we probably won't have to deal with a break like that next year, Parramatta will learn from that. They'll learn how to time their run. Now, on to question 2, how well they learn that and how fast they learn that will ultimately determine on whether they can go to the next step next year. Personally, it's a tough one. I mean, there's evidence to suggest they could, but then there's plenty of evidence. I remember it would have been 2017. They played in the finals, and I think it was 2018. I hope I'm getting my years here right.
Yeah.
They won the wooden spoon. So there is evidence to say they could go up, but then there's even more evidence to say they could go down, and therefore I'm going to be boring. I'm going to sit in the middle. I'm going to sit on the fence and say they sit around sort of the same period next year.
Yeah, I don't know. Para, I feel like they missed the top 4. I feel like they're still a top 8 team. The big thing for me for Parramatta this year has just been a bit, and I know he's been injured, the up and down form of Mitch Moses, for one. He's a player who needs to be in games for 80 minutes, and it's a bit of a weird one because it's a criticism, but it's a compliment. They need him because he is so good. So they need him playing for that 80 minutes. They need him being the leader. Dylan Brown has arguably been better than Moses this year, which I don't think a lot of people would have anticipated. Both wingers haven't been as good. I know Ferguson has been impacted by Wonga Blake in the centres, personally not getting as many opportunities, but he's still getting those opportunities, and I feel like he could have done a bit better. And in defence, I feel like the wingers, even the centres as well, probably should have stuck to their man instead of coming in as much as they did. But, it seems like Parramatta, we sort of know what the issues are, so you think that they would know how to fix it. If they can identify those issues, if we can identify those issues, surely they can. But yeah, at the moment, and it just depends as well. Obviously, we've not even gotten into the offseason. There are still free agents out there who are yet to be signed. We could have players, who knows, we probably will have players want to break contract and change clubs. So it's not something we can go into too much right now. But yeah, based off of what we know at the moment, Parramatta, I find it hard that they will go further up the ladder next year in 2021. I'm going to go to the other. Sorry?
As you say, though, it sort of comes back to, I remember a few years ago, you and I were always talking that the Knights are just on the cusp, but there's too much pressure on Mitchell Pearce. And how they learn to alleviate that pressure will ultimately decide when they become a top 8 team. This year, we saw Kurt Mann come in and alleviate a ton of that pressure. So when you look at the Eels, it's not going to be Dylan Brown because he's still young and we don't know how much better he can realistically get in such a short period, given he was almost better than Moses at stages this year. I think it comes back to someone like a Nathan Brown developing a bit more of a passing game. Seeing him at the moment, we know he's great for his hard hit ups, and that's what he's fantastic at. But potentially developing a little bit of ball playing like a Victor Radley, that could be the final piece that sort of alleviates that pressure off Moses. And then we see the Eels take the next step like we did with the Knights this year, obviously them coming back into the finals.
Yeah, we'll move now to the Sydney Roosters, the other team who got knocked out last week. Now, as you know, and as a lot of you know out there, I had them as back-to-back premiers. Unfortunately, for my prediction, that won't be the case. But on the Sydney Roosters, same question as Parramatta. Do they regress or progress next year? I feel like it's going to be a bit harder to answer this one because personally for me, they've got all the talent in the world. On paper, arguably the best team in the comp. Players are getting a bit older. There are questions over how players will go in 2021. There's a big spotlight currently on Kyle Flanagan. Reports suggest that they won't re-sign him next year. Although personally, I feel like he hasn't been terrible. He's not been the best in the world, but I feel like he probably deserves another chance. So what I'll ask you first is, what are your thoughts on the whole Kyle Flanagan situation? But then how do you think the Roosters go next year?
I think Kyle Flanagan, absolutely unfair criticism. I think what we see here are a bunch of people that have seen the Roosters win back-to-back, but are forgetting that was a team with Cooper Cronk, who at the time was the best halfback in the game, and Latrell Mitchell, who at the time, whether you like Latrell or you don't, the fact was he was second in the NRL for tries and first for points. So obviously absolutely integral to their success. So when you take those two elements out, suddenly fans are sort of looking for what went wrong. And it's very easy to point the finger at the new guy, which is, of course, Kyle Flanagan. But in his first full season of NRL, in a season where Luke Keary was out at stages with concussions, where their best, in my opinion, the best ball playing lock in the competition, Victor Radley, goes down, that's a ton of more pressure now on Kyle Flanagan. But I can't honestly say there was a game where I looked at Flanagan this year and said he played poorly. Yeah. There was certainly a few where I realised, and I suspect everyone did, that they didn't have Cooper Cronk there. And that's very, very easy to realise. And I suspect someone relatively new to the NRL could pick that up. But I think to target Kyle Flanagan, say he had a poor season and he deserves to be moved on, is absolutely not true. Compare him at the age of 22 now to Jonathan Thurston, who was still coming off the bench for the Bulldogs, to Andrew Johns, to Cooper Cronk himself, who, you know, when he was 22, I believe he was either just debuting off the bench or he was still a hooker being transferred into the halfback role. So you're comparing to some of the great halfbacks, and it's almost impossible to sit here and say that this guy doesn't have a bright future in the sport, right? Yeah. With everything he's had to overcome. So I think that's really, really unfair, sort of the criticism that was handed down to him.
Yeah, I personally don't think either. Even when he was dropped by Robbo, right, to shake things up, he wasn't out of form. He was still playing relatively well. I feel like it was just a bit of a shake-up and a bit of a wake-up call to Flano, because I feel like Robinson, because he is a great coach, was sort of saying that he could be headed towards that. He could be, you know, getting a bit overexhausted or whatever it was and just needed a break, and he got that. But, yeah, I don't think there's really been a game this year where he's played poor. We got to remember as well, his halves partner is Luke Keary as well. So when Keary's playing, Keary's on. And I guess it's sort of similar to Nathan Cleary last year. Didn't have the best of seasons, but you got to remember James Maloney was in control of that team. There wasn't much Cleary could do. So I see sort of similarities there. Now, obviously, Flanagan and Keary will work together. They will learn to work better, I believe, because they're going to have time together. They're going to have time to build that chemistry. It's not like Maloney, who was towards the end of his career, and Nathan Cleary coming through. Keary's pretty much sort of at his peak, and Flanagan's coming through, so they should be together for a good while. But yeah, the Sydney Roosters as a whole, how do you see them going next year at the moment?
I sort of draw on exactly what you just said there. As long as they keep Kyle Flanagan and Luke Keary there together, they're obviously going to re-sign Jake Friend, and they still have James Tedesco. That's an incredible spine. Yep. And with that spine, you look at all their other pieces. For me, there's no evidence to suggest this side will drop out of the top four. I don't necessarily see them going to a minor premiership or anything. And that's just because their focus as a club is purely on the premierships. Yeah. They'll be in the top four, I believe. Robinson will have them a little bit more well-prepared than they were this year, headed into the finals. But the only way I see that changing is if they make the decision that right away they think Kyle Flanagan is not the right fit, and let's start the development process again, and let's bring Sam Walker, who is 18 years old. Let's bring him into the side. But I think if they do that, then they need Keary to go into that number 7 role, which changes his attack down the short side. It changes a lot of the way he attacks the line. And I think you hand that 5/8 role to Sam Walker. I just can't see someone at the age of 18 with no NRL experience coming into a side and doing a better job than Flanagan did this year. So on what you were saying, continuing to build the chemistry there in their halves, if they make that decision, if they go down that path, I see them remaining the same. It's still in that top four, ready to contend for another premiership.
Yeah, well, you look at a Sam Walker, right, and it's the same argument you could give for a Josh Schuster at Manly with Kieran Foran coming in. There were concerns around him. Schuster's only 18-2. Schuster and Walker, they can afford to wait in reserve grade a couple of years, continue to build their game. It's not like they're going to miss out hugely. So we don't need to rush a Sam Walker in. We don't need to rush a Josh Schuster into a starting role. So I completely agree. I think Flano is the way to go. With the Sydney Roosters as well, it's sort of hard to come up with an argument as to why they would miss the top 8 for at least the next 5 years, when they're going to have guys like Walkiri and Tedesco. Those two alone almost get you there. But if you want to look at the forwards, Tupanil is probably going to be there for a while. He's had a really good year. Taukei'aho, I don't think is going anywhere. You know, those 4, I'm not saying those 4 alone sort of carry you, but those 4 with a solid squad behind them, not even as good a squad as they've got now, just a solid squad, at least gets you into that top 8. So I feel like the Roosters are probably going to be fine for probably at least the next half decade, unless Tedesco for some reason wants to sign elsewhere, or Akiri, but you know, I find that unlikely. Before we go, who's your tip for the premiership?
I've got to land with the Melbourne Storm now. I know the Raiders are capable of an upset, but I just feel the Melbourne Storm with that week off. We saw them with the week off for majority of their squad against the Eels. They were dominant. They were in control. I think they'll be able to do the same against the Raiders. And then I see them winning that game. Whoever makes it to the grand final between the Rabbitohs and the Panthers, both sides have not been in grand finals or preliminary finals, big games consistently over the last 10 years like the Melbourne Storm have. And therefore, when we did see Storm beat in the finals, in the grand final in particular, it was by another team, the Sydney Roosters, who similarly had the last decade high up there typically in the finals. So when it gets to the big dance, I see the Melbourne Storm having the experience and the composure to defeat whoever it is, whether it's the Panthers or the Rabbitohs. But as you say, if the Panthers do win that 17 in a row, they'd be going for 18 in a row to win the comp. It would be hard to deny them, but I'll stick with my gut feeling. I think the Storm have the composure and the experience to do so. It'll
be close. And I'll tell you what, if any team is going to dethrone Penrith in a grand final specifically, it's going to be Melbourne, isn't it? I mean, the last time they versed, Penrith did win, but they've not versed since near the start of the season, in the first half of the season. So a completely different Storm side, a different Penrith side, not necessarily in terms of the blokes on the field, but just how they've developed throughout the year. It'll be a good one to watch, but I'm going to have to lean towards Melbourne too, just because of that finals and big game experience, you know. And if it is Cam Smith's swan song, I think he'll want to go out on top, obviously, and they'll want to send him out a winner. Well, Clarkey, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Guys, Clarkey's Rugby League column on Facebook, Clarkey's RL column on Instagram, and as you can see below here, his YouTube channel is Clarkey's Rugby League column. Once again, man, thank you for coming on this afternoon and talking a bit of footy, and thank all of you watching at home.
Thanks for the opportunity, man, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it.